I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Today, I'm delighted to be joined on this episode by Ewen Bradley, a highly experienced program leader across both private and public sector organisations. Let me introduce you to him now. Hi, Ewen. Great that you could join us today. Most of your career has been working in either the public sector or publicly owned utilities, which we can explore further over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm sure. But whilst introducing yourself, can you answer this question? How and why did you get involved in program change delivery roles?
Well, I think, first of all, very, very kind of you to invite me onto this podcast, Tony. I've listened to some of the other ones and they've been great. For my part, a brief background on me is I spent 17 odd years in a software engineering company, doing every role possible, to be honest, which gave me great grounding for what I moved on to, which is more in the transformation space. I have to say I'm a bit of a guy who just goes with the flow, so to speak. So my career has been a bit like that, as opposed to be by design. I left the software company and moved into a contracting role in the energy sector, which I did for a few years. An opportunity came to work for another systems integrator for a while. And I went through a contract termination with a client and ended up being tupied into a water utility. Many would say kicking and screaming. But I stayed there in a transformation role for 9 years. I suppose honing my craft in many ways. And then since that, I've moved into back into contracting in the public sector space in the UK, primarily dealing with back office replacement with new cloud-based technologies and the associated transformation that goes with that.
I think it's interesting. I think most people's response to that question is very similar. That almost like it wasn't a formal decision. It was more we fell into it almost by accident and then enjoyed it. When you moved into the project space, what was it that you particularly enjoyed?
I think my button is just to bring value to organizations. And I can see that I can get in to an organization and quite quickly see what the issues are and help define strategies to address those. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. But I'm also very keen to I suppose get into detail and see it through. It's all very well coming up with a grand strategy, but if the execution's not there, then what's the point?
Yeah, so it's the end-to-end piece that you.
Yes.
So how do you define transformation then?
I think for me, it boils down to the current state of an organization, which obviously has identified issues, whether they be issues in terms of customer, unforeseen issues like COVID, for example, or threat from competitors. So there are some or one or more defining issues that generate a strong case for change. And once that's there, for me, it is okay. You've got your case for change. What do you need to do now to transform the organization into what it needs to become to be successful?
Yeah. And of the programs that you've been involved in, have there been some commonalities of the type of those transformations? What was the catalyst for the transformations that you've been working on?
Over the last, I suppose 5-6 years, there has been commonality in that the public sector organisations I've worked for have found themselves in a position where they're on really old technology that have been heavily customized for processes that are just no longer fit for purpose, and continuing down that customization road is just too expensive. So in those cases, that there's a very clear need to say, well, actually, we need to relook at this from scratch. And I think that has been helped very much by the introduction of new cloud-based technology, because it does, it facilitates that move, and helps organizations make that decision, as opposed to potentially looking at a huge on-premise replacement program at extremely high cost.
Yeah.
So I think that the advances in technology, coupled with the fact that these organizations are really suffering, has created nearly a perfect storm in some respects. And I work primarily in government in recent years, and you can see that. You can see an awful lot of these organizations are following the same path.
Yeah.
It's great for me because of I move from one to the other and bringing on of the lessons I learned with me.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. A lot of organisations I've worked with over probably the last 6 or 7 years have been exactly the same, where there's been a technology bias to the programme, in so much that they are transitioning from, as you say, on-premise systems that have been customised to the hilt and customizations on top of customizations, and actually has been almost like a straitjacket for the organization in terms of the ability to be agile and adapt to new changes and ways of working. And the transition into, as you say, a more sort of vanilla cloud-based solution is, the business case for it has been very clearly been able to demonstrate, but the challenge has always been getting people to change, and that is generally the issue, isn't it? And how have you found that within the public sector organisations that you've been working with? That sort of they've worked with a process, they've lived with a process, they know the systems, but actually moving into something that is more sort of vanilla means that those sort of processes needed to be radically changed, and by definition, the people needed to radically change the way of working.
Yeah, I think it breaks into two camps, really. I mean, there is a camp that says we like our processes, there's nothing wrong, and what they tend to end up doing is putting in new technology, but just re-implementing the same inefficient processes.
Absolutely.
And that's the danger with these things. In some case, that's down to an appetite for change and how much change you do at the one time, because introducing a new technology for many people is a big change in itself, particularly if they've been using the same technology for 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations tend to say, well, let's get the technology in and then we'll address the process, which is fine. On the other hand, you do, and I have seen people sort of look at this new technology, look at the out-of-the-box best-in-class processes that are available and what they can do. And I remember at one client in particular, there were like audible gasps of astonishment that, wow, the technology can actually do this, and how much easier will my job be as a result of that. And they're the nuggets, they're the people that you need to get on your team and help drive the change throughout the organization. Totally.
Yeah, and it's also identifying those and getting them involved in letting them become the change agents for the program, isn't it? And equally identifying those that are maybe not so positive about it, and working on them very early on and hopefully turning them around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's definitely a fear factor there. Transformation in a lot of people's eyes is, I'm going to lose my job, or my job is a threat. And that's the thing that you have to very, very quickly address with them. To say, yes, your job might change, but it's still a job, and we will provide you with all the necessary training to make sure you can do it to the best of your ability. Some of that is, to be fair, is technology based, but in a lot of cases I found that there is basic training that is required. Things like, I shouldn't really say this in some ways, but people working in procurement who don't understand what a purchase order is.
Yeah.
Or people who are spending money that don't understand that you need a contract in place to allow you to spend. And that's historic, to be fair, but that's the type of things that you unearth when you get into these types of transformation programs.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I remember years back now, I was putting a new works and asset management system into a rail company. Part of the issue was getting data back, and one of the major challenges was a lot of the data wasn't in systems; it was on paper. And even though it was on paper, in many cases, it had been changed and adapted, so it was in people's heads. So we had to go out and work with the individuals to extract that knowledge that's been built up over many years, to get it into a data form to then populate the system so that we can improve the processes. What you're just saying there around those people that had been working in the industry or working in the organization for so long had built up almost this individual ways of working, and they were circumnavigating the systems in many respects, and understanding that and bringing that to the fore. You needed to do that before you could ever really put the system in. Otherwise, the system would never work. And sounds like you've had similar experiences.
No, very, very much so. You mean in many ways the technology is the easy part. It's all about the culture, the ways of working, the outdated policies and processes that are in place, and trying to break those down and get people to understand actually there is a better way. And yes, I appreciate you've been doing it like this for 20 years, but trust me, and some of these new technology solutions are great because you can see that solution pretty much straight away. Within 5-6 weeks, we can provide demonstrations of that with their own data, which is a very powerful means to say, well, actually, this is your data, and this is a process for claiming an expense, for example. What's wrong with it? Will it work for your organization? And you sort of go through that, and in your head have like an overriding design concept of out of the box is the way we go, unless there's a regulatory or a legal reason for it not to be, because all organizations are different, then stick with what's there, because the likes of Workday and Oracle and whatever have spent millions and millions of pounds fine-tuning their products to be best in class, and those products need to be exploited. Yes, there is a degree of configuration or customization that needs to be done, but at the end of the day, HR processes are HR processes, finance processes are finance processes. It's not difficult.
I agree, and I spend many times and many experiences with clients explaining that when you break an organization down, irrespective of what sector they're in, where they're located in the world, what they physically do, whether they're B2C or B2B, basically all organizations are the same. There's a finance function, there's an HR function, there's an IT function, there's a customer service function, etc., etc. And when you break those individual parts down, the processes beneath them should be relatively consistent and common, or can be, not necessarily should be, can be. And that's what these new cloud-based technologies are based upon. So there needs to be a very strong argument to say, we know better than they do, and you always hear, don't you? Well, but we're different. We're this industry with that industry, and it won't work in this industry. And it's just keep pushing back, isn't it, and challenging that preconceived idea that you are different, because in many cases you're not.
No, I agree, and particularly in let's say public sector where I work, there's been a lot of work around this sort of one civil service concept. To say, well, here's a standardized set of HR and finance processes that ought to work for all departments. And the common objection is, no, but we're different. And, there may be differences. Some organizations, departments are policy generating departments, some are funding, sending money out. But if you break it down to its core, the processes ought to be very, very similar. And I would support that move to standardization. I'm not saying that every single civil servant should be on the same platform running all of the same processes, but there's certainly merit in looking at some sort of shared service type approach or whatever. And indeed there is work ongoing at the minute around that, which is proving very interesting.
I live in Lancashire, and probably within 45 minutes of where I am, a radius of 45 minutes, there's the Cumbria Police Force, there's the Lancashire Police Force, the Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Merseyside. So 5 separate organisations within, as you say, a relatively small geographical area. But because of the population, that's the rationale for having 5 separate organisations. But each one of those, certainly last time I looked, it may have changed because it was a good few years ago. But each of those had a separate HR function, separate training function, a separate IT function. So much duplication. And the question has always been, why? Why is that required? Why can't you, as you say, put in some shared services on a geographical basis, or however you want to work it? But there's always been pushback. I don't necessarily think it's a public sector issue. I think it's generally, there's always this pushback that we know better, we're different, etc., etc. And all those sort of preconceived ideas just need to be broken down.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it boils down to power and control.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm in charge of this organisation. I don't need you providing any services. I'm in control of my own destiny. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I've literally just started work with a blue light service in Northern Ireland, and it's very encouraging to see that there is quite a lot of cooperation between the ambulance service and the fire service, in terms of shared office space, etc., etc. Yeah. Certainly not platforms, because they are in this case very different in terms of what they're trying to do, but at least there's a degree of commonality to try and reduce the costs to the general public at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think it's I don't necessarily think it's should be a cost-driven exercise, although by definition you would hope that you'll be able to take some cost out of the process. But I think there's a consistency message. So when they move into a new organisation, the induction process is that much easier, because they know what they've got to do to raise expenses, or they know what to do if they want to book a holiday and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's all those knock-on effects of just making it easier for people to work with you.
No, I agree. And to be fair to government in defining these standard services and processes, that's what they're aiming to do, is just trying to play that out into the individual departments is where the challenge lies.
Yeah. So in terms of your career and the various programs that you've been involved in, what's been the most interesting one for you?
That's a very good question. I think my time in the water utility was extremely interesting, because I ended up in a position of managing a very large organizational wide program that brought me into areas that I knew absolutely nothing about: water treatment, wastewater treatment, the use of electricity in those processes. This particular utility had actually built up something like £32 million a year, and you just say, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Yeah. Other areas where there was real challenges from a HR perspective. So it was very broad, and gave me extremely valuable experience as a result of that. And obviously the program itself proved to be successful in driving operational efficiency and in improving customer satisfaction scores. So I can take some satisfaction from that.
Yeah.
I suppose more recently, the work I've done in public sector has also been very exciting for me, because it's the first project I worked on at the Office for Students was the first deployment of Workday ERP in public sector.
Right.
And since then they've gone on from strength to strength on the back of that. So it was a real challenging project from a stakeholder perspective to convince them to invest in something that was brand new, as opposed to going with the more traditional. But once that was done, and I was very lucky to have an extremely passionate head of finance who really drove that a program forward once the decision was made. It was a very challenging transformation, and particularly in terms of timelines, etc., and the fact that there was a lot of organizational change going on at the same time, but ultimately very, very successful. Yeah. So a lot of satisfaction can be derived from that.
And just going back to the earlier one where you were saying you were looking at a transformation across the whole organisation in the water industry. Presumably at that stage you had multiple stakeholders looking after the different maybe water treatment, water replenishment, etc. How did you what approach did you put in place to ensure that you were taking all of those stakeholders on the journey, and how did you manage to take them on that journey and manage their, some people will have been for it, some people might have been against it. How did you manage all of that?
With great difficulty. I think in that particular instance, I suppose what helps is you have a regulator driving the company to achieve better results. And
that was your cliff edge. That was your, as you say,
yes.
That was your burning platform almost.
And I worked in a business transformation department whose sole purpose was to, well, how can we make this happen? Right. In terms of operational efficiencies and customer satisfaction. We worked extremely hard through many workshops with all of the key stakeholders, both internal and external, to define what was called the Achieving Customer Excellence program. Right. A lot of that was on a one-to-one basis with individuals, directors, to clearly lay out, what it meant for them, what they were signing up to. Got down to a level of detail that might have said, well, we're going to reduce your budget in this area because of the efficiencies in spending with contractors, or a reduction in headcount, etc. So it got down to a level of detail where directors had to know exactly what was happening because they were signing off budget reductions on a year-on-year basis. CEO was relatively new and a very keen supporter of the program, but it's not easy because myself and colleagues in that department, none of us really had a water or wastewater background. So the old hands, so to speak, who'd been there for years and knew their business inside out, were very quick to say, well, what do you know about this? Yeah. And a testament to many on the team as well. I don't know anything, but I tell you what, by the end of this, I'll know everything. And that worked very well. And we also took a trial and error approach to say, I know you disagree with what we're proposing, but let's do it on this one site. And let's see if it makes a difference. I remember conversations around electricity usage in wastewater treatment works, which is very high. And a lot of it's driven by compliance and meeting certain standards. But when we actually dug into it, the compliance targets were being blown out of the water. Yeah. As a consequence, they were using loads of electricity, but you just dial down the compliance level, still overachieving. Yeah. The electricity usage dropped significantly, and we trialed that in one treatment works, and it was proved successful. And then you set up a program and roll it out with the director's support to say, well, okay, you've proved your point, so let's. Yeah,
it's that proof of concept, isn't it? I had a similar experience 2 or 3 years ago. I was working with one of the national utility firms, and it was on an efficiency campaign. It was focused around making sure that they can deliver large scale infrastructure programs much more efficiently and effectively moving forward. And they're in exactly the same situation. We sort of turned the process. They gold plated everything. The client might have wanted X, Y, Z, but they gave them 2-3 times X, Y, Z, just in case they wanted to develop that area in the future. So they future-proofed it, and it cost obviously a lot more than what it would have cost just to give the client what they were looking for.
Yeah.
But it was that mindset of that sort of whole utility. Well, I'm here to do the best I can possibly do, and I'm here to build the infrastructure for the future.
Yeah.
And change that mindset to say, well, yeah, absolutely, we build it for the future, but we've got to still build it for what the client's looking for and what the client's prepared to pay for.
No, I agree. And if I look back on it, one of the other key things in that was involving the guys who actually ran the treatment works. I'm not taking any credit for this. The team that worked on this did a brilliant job in actually taking it so far as saying, creating videos where the guys who ran the plants were on the video saying, this is what we were spending beforehand. We've introduced these changes, or I've introduced these changes, and now I'm at this level. And playing that out to the rest of the organization really won over the hearts and minds. So, it sort of opened the door to suggest other changes, making sure that the change is owned within the business as opposed to being driven by a program team who, in most times, meet a high level of resistance, so to speak. And that's probably the key lesson I would take from that particular program, is ensuring that you transfer ownership of the particular program to the people that are in the line, so to speak, is probably the key aspect of it.
It goes back to what we talked about earlier, doesn't it? They become the change agents. You know, that it's
yes.
Actually, I know that person, and if they believe it, well, you know, I'm definitely behind it, as opposed to, as you say, a program team that don't know the industry but coming in and doing that challenging review process. That there's always a reticent, but if they know the person, they trust the person that's telling them a message that this works, they'll definitely go with it and move things forward.
Absolutely.
So what do you see if you're taking on a new program? What are the sort of vital steps that you feel you have to have in place, or the building blocks that you have to have in place for a sort of successful business transformation?
Well, for me, there needs to be a clear vision and a really strong case for change. That needs supported by strong leadership, and I'll use the word aligned leadership, because there's no point one director having a great idea if the rest of the management team are totally against it. So an awful lot of that work, that prep work in terms of defining what it is, and ensuring there is alignment there and real buy-in from the senior management team is probably the first and most critical step.
And all too often that's not ignored. People try to go through that process too quickly, I find. And
yes.
Sometimes it's far better just to step back and ensure that you do everything that you possibly can to get everyone aligned, and then move forward. Because you're in a much stronger. It's like you've got the foundations in place for success, then, haven't you?
Yeah, and from my experience in the sort of public sector arena, we're helped by the fact that there is a process to go through in terms of strategic outline cases and down into a final business case, etc. That helps take you through that journey, and with proper internal and external scrutiny, you ought to end up with a very strong evidence-based business case that supports the investment. Once you get to that stage, it's all about planning, and the key aspects of this that are often overlooked is resource, particularly internal resource. These transformations are difficult, and you need the best people in the organization to be part of that team. They need to be dedicated and backfilled, as opposed to being put in a position where they're trying to do their day job and help in a program capacity at the same time. It just doesn't work. Yeah, I think also as you move forward, that strong leadership needs to be there throughout. All too often you find a senior manager, okay, that business case is approved, so the job's done.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's not done. You need to be out leading this right front and center. What's the phrase, tone from the top, throughout, to ensure that the rest of the organization sees that you are committed to this, and therefore you have a better chance of having them committed to the process as well.
They've got to own that business case, haven't they? I think where programs tend to fail is when a business case has been signed off, but the senior team don't take ownership of delivering that business case. They almost abdicate the responsibility onto the program team.
That's right.
And that is a recipe for disaster.
It is, and it just makes it so much more challenging, because when you go out to the rest of the organisation, if you don't have that senior leadership backup and visibility, then you bang your head against a brick wall.
And especially when you're trying to extract people that you need into the program team.
Yes.
And getting them backfilled. If you don't have that sort of that leadership driving and supported and taking responsibility for it, the middle managers hold on to the good people naturally.
Yes.
And that's all, I find that's always been a challenge of just extracting the right people at the right time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Resourcing is probably key. I also think there's an awful lot of work needs done in terms of, say, call it change impact assessment. So we need to clearly work out the impact of this program on all of the stakeholders or groups of employees in particular, customers, etc., and have a very detailed change management plan that goes alongside any sort of technology aspect to it. But without that change management, then yes, you might be replacing a legacy system, but you're not actually changing the goalposts, so to speak. You're not transforming the organisation and how it works.
Yeah, using a sports analogy, you're just changing the colour of the kit, aren't you?
Yes.
If you've not changed the players, or if you've not changed the tactics, you're going to still get the same results.
Absolutely.
It might look and feel a bit better because you've got nice new kit on in different colours, but fundamentally the results won't change.
No. I mean, you'll probably see a slight improvement in efficiency because the newer technology is just better at doing its job. But if you're still running that same HR process or procurement process with all the steps and handoffs and et cetera, then actually are you really any better off? And it's a chronic waste of money in many respects.
Yeah. And in your experience, technology-driven programs, do you feel that sort of change impact assessment is seen to be a critical part of the process? Or do you, in my perception, my experience, then especially on technology-driven transformation programs, it's often seen as something that we'll do later, not an integral part of the program.
Yeah, I remember on one of the clients I worked with, it was very much, can you please do the change management with a small c? And I'm going, what? Very much relegated to just do what you need to do to get this over the line, but be sure to get the technology in by the right. I can understand to an extent. I don't mind that if it's actually a deliberate strategy. I had a conversation with another client this week where their strategy is very deliberate. That they are a 40-year family-owned business. All the employees have been there from leaving school. They are working on really, really old technology. And the transformation challenge is huge. But to say to that organization, right, we're going to change your technology and we're going to transform the way you work and change all of the processes would just kill it.
Yeah.
So, in this case, the strategy is very deliberate. We'll replace the technology and then we'll start to address all the other aspects as part of a 3 to 5 year program, and that's absolutely fine. I can completely understand that because there is a risk profile to these programs that needs to be borne in mind. But what I don't like to see is, can you just get the technology in and do some training?
Yeah, absolutely. The family business there has a strategy that they've worked through that, and they understand that process, that it is a 3 to 5 year transition, that it is, there will be there'll be periods where they're not going to get the maximum value from their investment. Yes. Because they've looked at it from end to end and they understand it. All too often, I find that it's almost, let's get the icon on the screen and give someone a bit of training and maybe a couple of weeks support, post go live support, and then they'll be okay, won't they?
Yeah.
And it's those that the business cases never delivered because they
no. You'd be straight back to a spreadsheet to do all the work, and then which defeats the whole purpose, to be honest with you.
So if you had to sort of pull all your experience together and leave just one takeaway for people, what would that one takeaway be?
You need to have fun. It's a strange thing to say in many respects, but these programs are really hard work. And there are obviously certain building blocks that you need to put in place for it to be successful. But I think you've got to acknowledge that it's hard work, and in 99% of the time, people will work to the best of their ability to make it happen. And I think if you sort of have an ethos where you're celebrating success, it engenders much more of a one team approach, and hugely increases your chance of success.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Ewen. That was really good and really enjoyable.
No problem at all.
And look forward to seeing you very soon.
All right. Cheers, Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Ewen. If you want to join Ewen and share your experience, please do get in touch. Also, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the pod via your app and leave a comment or two. It's always great to get your feedback. This is the last episode of 2020. When we started the podcast back at the start of the year, little did we know how the year would turn out. Have a great Christmas, and I look forward to sharing other business transformation journeys with you in 2021. All the best.